Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, the housekeeping in this episode really only has to do with the release date and why I don't cover certain things. You see, this episode is being released on the 21st, but it's being recorded on the 18th, which means that it will be recorded before the 20th. And the 20th is where we're getting two elections going on in Latin America. The Ecuadorian election and the Guatemalan election. I'm going to predict that Bernardo Arevalo and the candidates of Rafael Correa's party win, but of course with the Ecuadorian election it's going to be a two-person runoff, so for that one I'll probably have to guess it is based on polling, her and I believe his name is Jan Tropic, and you'll see why in a second, but some of it is just due to polling and whatever. And another interesting thing is that this video, a lot of the news stories are coming from foreign elections and foreign news stories. So let's not to dilly-dally anymore. Let's get right into the news. First, coming from Germany, a very big development is going on in Germany. If you don't know much about German politics, brief reminder for you, there are 6 major parties within German politics. The Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, which are the mainstream center-right and center-left parties, not respectively. Then you have the two parties for people who don't really verge that far from those two parties politically, but want to be unique in some capacity, which is where you get the Greens on the left and the Free Democrats on the right. But then the last category is the parties that are for the radicals on both sides of the aisle. Die Linke for the left, and on the right side of the aisle, we have the Alternative for Germany, or AfD party. Now, unsurprisingly, the latter two parties are seen as somewhat controversial. Die Linke ties its roots back to East Germany. Meanwhile, the AfD is very controversial because that nation has a history with far-right populist parties that use images and ideologies regarding, like, nativism and anti-religious sentiment of religions that are not Christian. So it's sort of like an unspoken rule that the rest of German society, avoids this party like the plague, to the point where none of the other parties will form a coalition with this party, and most people who are openly supportive of this party are not really looked at favorably. But one big problem that has been going on is that right-wing populist sentiment is growing again. Like, it grew a little bit in the aftermath of the Trump presidency, and now it's sort of coming back. And the AfD is getting to the point where it is surging to 21% of the polls, which has led to a large problem, especially considering the fact that the AfD is not only already pretty radical and extreme, but it is already having a shift to be more right-wing and more extreme. Like, most people associate the AfD not necessarily as far-right, but hard-right. The difference between far-right and hard-right is that the far-right is explicitly anti-democracy, like literally borderline fascist. Meanwhile, the hard-right is basically, they're like the far-right, but they do not oppose democracy. It's basically the difference between alt-right and alt-light. It's like, really the difference is just the name, and basically no real distinction between the two. And during, the last election, there was actually a report done by the German, intelligence agencies that were basically explaining, they were looking into the rising extremist rhetoric within the AfD, as many of it was starting to become very anti-democratic, which the AfD tried to then say, look, the media's trying to smear us, and they didn't really go further in depth on that because it's a pending investigation, so we don't necessarily know what to do yet. And now, there's been talks, very open talks, about potentially banning the AfD from running in elections. And a lot of people have had a certain number of things to say about this development. One big thing that I've seen a lot of right-wingers say is who are the people that banned political parties again? trying to make it the claim like, oh, you're going to claim that the AFD is fascist, and then yet you are going to try and ban the AFD. Who's the real fascist here? It's like, the AFD. The AFD is the fascist one. Like, no. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like, the AFD is the fascist one. And then I've seen other people kind of, like, give tepid explanations like, banning political parties is bad, actually. When, look, just being objective, looking at the situation, the AFD has existed for a long period of time, and it has not really done that much bad. It's had, of course, right-wing, like, pretty right-wing rhetoric, and it's probably been responsible for certain bills and certain laws that have been done in certain areas. Not only was it contained by the rest of the like political establishment and the rest of the politics of Germany from preventing it from like becoming as dangerous as it would be, but due to the fact that after like Germany and its like shame about the Nazis, it of course had to not like it always had to not go that far. It had a place where it had to stop. But from these reports, it's saying, like, they're starting to think about those areas where they had to stop, and they're not trying to stop no more. I'll just be 100% crystal clear on this. There were many ways to stop the Nazis before they rose to power. And the AFD is starting to... Like, I mean, I'm not trying to explicitly say that they're coming back to power. They're going to enter power. But they're entering the ways that are starting to become prevalent. Like... The Nazis didn't start off as like a big powerhouse. They built themselves up over years. The AFD is doing the same thing. Pretty sure the Nazis didn't immediately run around going like, Jews, Jews, Jews. They probably started out with like smaller stuff. Went like, oh, the bankers. Fascism doesn't immediately just walk in with like swastikas and all this jazz. They start small and then they build themselves up. The same thing is happening in a lot of other countries. Now, some people would probably worry, like, but won't this turn the AFD into becoming more of, like, radical with seeing with the party being, like, gone? It's like, ultimately, you're seeing two roads, and this is the only road that seems to be viable in this regard. Now, the fact of the matter is, banning the AFD is probably not going to happen regardless. Because the AFD, the Germans tried to ban a explicitly neo-Nazi party, like, not that long ago, and that outlook failed, so the AFD is probably safe for the time being, but just be mindful, be careful, because the fact of the matter is, in order to stop fascism, you need to take some precautions that are not necessarily comfortable. They said the same thing about Hitler and Mussolini. You know, you see them doing their little thing, and you're like, we don't need to ban them, we can just beat them in elections. Okay, maybe we didn't beat them in the elections, but we can beat them next time. Okay, maybe if we form coalitions with these other parties, then maybe we'll have a chance. It's like, you're gonna have to inevitably make a tough decision. Anyways, let's move on to the next story, which is an update explaining the situation in Latin America, because, oh boy, Latin America, they might be experiencing a big change coming soon, and not necessarily for the better. This is revolving around the Argentinian election that just happened. The winner of that election was Javier Milei, a member of the Libertarian Party of Argentina, or his coalition, the Liberty Advances. And not only was he the one who managed to make it to the next round, but he was basically the winner. Now, if you don't know how Argentinian elections work, here is how they go. You see, in Argentina, they have something that is essentially like an open, like not, in like a kind of like a jungle primary and like an open primary. Well, I guess technically it's more of a jungle primary, but like basically every single candidate who files to run for president, regardless of their party, enters into one singular primary. And then not only that, every single resident of Argentina from age 16 to 70 has to vote in the election. And what happens is all the candidates run, and then all the votes get tabulated at the same time. And what happens is first you divide it by party, and every party that gets a combined total of above 1.5% moves on to the general election. And if that party or coalition had more than 2 people running, then only the top vote getter in that party / coalition gets to go. For example, in this election, the Union for the Homeland Coalition, or the Peronist Coalition, had 2 candidates running, Sergio Massa and Juan Graboy. Juan Graboy was the candidate I was supporting. Unfortunately, Juan didn't get enough support, so Sergio Massa gets to be the candidate in the general election. The candidates that do move on to the general election are Sergio Massa, Patricia Bullrich, Javier Milei, Juan Schiaretti, and Miriam Bregman. The people that were probably the most, these were the ones that people expected to move on to the general election, essentially. There was no other candidate or party that even remotely came close to making it. Well, actually, Juan Graboy did really well. Vote-wise, the candidates within the party's coalitions did okay, but, broadly, it just didn't work out. Juan Graboy, if he was running alone, then he might have had a chance to make it to the general election. Yeah, he had a total of 5% of the votes, so he would have made it to the general election had he chosen to run solo. But the fact of the matter is, it was probably due to the fact that he was in that coalition that might have pushed him to get that percentage. But either way, it doesn't really matter, because we got the 5 people who are going to be in the general election, and many people are expecting that Javier Milei is going to be the victor overall. We will go more in depth on Javier Milei when we inevitably do a episode on the election in Argentina, but the fact of the matter is, he is not really that much of an interesting figure. For starters, he is very much labeled as a far-right populist, which he is, but not necessarily in the same vein as other far-right populists in Argentina and other worldwide, Latin American countries. And he has directly praised both Jair Bolsonaro and Donald Trump, particularly in regards to their anti-communist rhetoric. He has close ties with the Spanish political party Vox. He praised Jose Cast. So it's like, let me explain, because we're seeing this is sort of the beginning, well, not necessarily the beginning, this is sort of the next step in a change in both the pink tide and the blue tide. You see, for those who don't know, the pink tide is, of course, the left-wing Latin American wave of leaders. Meanwhile, the conservative wave, or the conservative tide, or the blue tide, is basically referring to all the times that those left, it's basically the response to the pink tide, in a way. Even though a lot of the people who would be considered leaders of the blue tide aren't necessarily leaders of countries that had pink tide leaders, or ones that came after pink tide leaders. For example, Enrique Peña Nieto is considered part of the conservative wave, even though not only did he take over from a conservative president, but the pink tide hadn't really touched Mexico until after Enrique Peña Nieto. But the thing is, much like how not each wave of the pink tide is the same thing goes for this new sort of conservative wave. You see, if we were to describe the pink tide's early stages, they would be very much closely related to Hugo Chavez. A lot of pink tide leaders looked up to Chavez, had very high praises for Chavez in Venezuela, and were just generally in a very similar vein to him, even if they were not necessarily the same as him ideologically. For example, first wave of pink tide leaders was Hugo Chavez, Ricardo Lagos, Nestor Kirchner, Lula da Silva, Manuel Zelaya, Tabaré Vázquez, and Evo Morales. You could divide them into various different groups. Morales and Chavez are regarded as the furthest left of those. Meanwhile, Lagos, Lula, and Kirchner are more reformist. Vázquez probably also being considered more reformist, because he's the reason why there is the term the pink tide, because they said instead of a red wave, it was more of a pink tide because it was more soft social democratic. Zelaya, he didn't really have a chance to do anything in regards to that. Meanwhile, in the conservative wave, who were some of the earliest voices in the conservative wave? Porfirio Lobo Sosa, Juan Manuel Santos, Sebastián Pinera, Enrique Peña Nieto, Federico Franco. Like, the ones who basically kickstarted the blue wave against the pink tide were the ones that were basically just cut and paste from the same neoliberal cloth that happened prior. But Latin America is the region where if you keep giving people the same thing over and over and over again, eventually they're going to get bored and they're going to try and change that system. Inevitably, when the pink tide leaders got complacent and just kept giving people the same thing, people wanted something different and turned to right-wing leaders. But when those right-wing leaders kept giving people the same thing over and over and over again, people would turn to a different direction. And so now the new waves of the blue tide and the pink tide, they're not having a different, change. Now, rather than having them being cut from the same neoliberal block as they were before, now the blue tide is sort of changing to a right-wing populist sentiment. But even then, we're starting to see a little bit of a change in that regard as well, because originally it went to people like Jair Bolsonaro. But now it's changing a little bit again. Now it's heading towards the people who would be considered sort of in the quote-unquote libertarian left quadrant of the political compass. People like Nayib Bukele, and in this case, Javier Milei. The pink tide is going through sort of a similar thing where now a lot of pink tide leaders and politicians are openly distancing themselves from a lot of other Latin American leftist nations, at least rhetorically, where now they're openly willing to criticize each other rather than just simply being all hunky-dory in the same boat. So yeah, now on to the next story. Enrique de la Madrid is out of the next stage of the Broad Front of Mexico. Yes, the Front for Mexico is moving forward again with their nomination process. Now they're on the last stage where the top 3 vote getters of the most recent poll that they did will have to move on to a series of different polls to determine who will be the candidates. And as that story mentioned, Enrique de la Madrid did not make the cut. Not necessarily surprising. Of the candidates in question, he was the one with the lowest profile. Plus, if you don't know, that last name, de la Madrid, is a reference to the fact that he is the son of one of the literally worst presidents in Mexican history. So that probably didn't help him either. So on the final round, we have Xochitl Galvez, Santiago Creel, and Beatriz Paredes. Things are starting to heat up, and oh boy, it's kind of interesting to see where things are going to lie. But at the end of the day, it seems that at this point, it's most likely going to be Xochitl Galvez, which begs a couple of questions. For starters, here's one small thing I'll mention. Remember when I mentioned that the PRD, after their candidates epically lost, that, getting into this round, they were like, we're going to throw a tantrum and we're going to threaten to leave the coalition? Yeah, well, they didn't leave the coalition. They just immediately endorsed Xochitl Galvez. That way, when Xochitl Galvez gets to be the nominee, they can say we had faith in her that she would win. But that was not even the plan. And next, the citizens movement still hasn't moved forward with their process. And it seems that they're still waiting. It does seem like at this point they are waiting to see if Xochitl Galvez becomes the nominee. Because they've stated, some members of the MC have stated that they would be open to extending their candidacy to Xochitl Galvez if she is the nominee of the Frente Amplio coalition. However, not only has the leader of the MC stated that he is not interested in doing so, but also a poll was conducted that showed that 7 out of 10 Mexicans believe that the MC needs to remain electorally independent in the next election. Personally, I don't see them disappointing their voters, so I think they are probably going to remain electorally independent. But we still have until December to see, so let's see what they do. So, speaking of things we have to wait and see about, first, I'm going to start off with an important news story first. This one's important. This is an important American news story. Then I'm going to get into a not important news story, because it's not even news, it's drama. Okay, so North Carolina lawmakers override veto on trans care ban anti-LGBTQ bill. GOP supermajorities enacted over Governor Roy Cooper's opposition a bill barring gender-affirming care to people under 18. Transgender youth in North Carolina lost access Wednesday to gender-affirming treatment after the Republican-led General Assembly overrode the Democratic governor's vetoes on that legislation and other bills touching the gender in sports and LGBTQ plus instruction in the classroom. GOP supermajorities in the House and Senate enacted over, that's what it just said at the beginning, a bill barring medical professionals from providing hormone therapy, puberty-blocking drugs, and surgical gender transition procedures to anyone under 18 with limited medical exceptions. The policy takes effect immediately, but minors who have begun treatment before August 1st may continue to receive that care if their doctors deem it medically necessary and their parents consent. That is the only potential silver lining in this bill. And I say potential because at the end of the day, their doctors might not deem it medically necessary because a lot of medical stuff sometimes is I don't know necessarily the ins and outs, but sometimes a lot of the doctors might see it as like a not important procedure, and their parents might not consent to the procedure. But thankfully, at least the ones who have liberal to progressive to socialist parents, at least they can still have their care if they need it. I hope. Very big deal. People should be protesting in the streets about this. Very big deal. Best case scenario, we keep a blue governor in there to try and make sure that we can stop more bills like this from going on in the future. Anyways, now let's move on to the last and literally the dumbest, absolutely brain-dead thing that has come out of lefty Twitter discourse again. At this point, I'm probably going to have to make an episode explicitly talking about AOC and her dramas and her controversies or whatever, because legitimately, at this point, I'll just say it. I'll just say at this point right here, right now, there is no more criticisms of AOC. No more criticisms of AOC. I've stated this before, the people who hate AOC have made AOC immune to criticism. Every single person who criticizes AOC from this point forward, I don't look at them favorably. They are bad. Anybody who criticizes, I don't care if you criticize her for things that she has legitimately done wrong. At this point, it's just stupid. And I know people will say, you're an AOC stan. Sure, whatever. I'm an AOC stan. All the squad are perfect members of Congress, and they are not bad. Squad good. Squad good. So what is the controversy? Well, AOC made an Instagram video with the head of a sunscreen company basically telling people how we need to improve how our sunscreens... Okay, let's just read this article that explains it. It was sparked last Thursday when Ocasio-Cortez spoke out about the poor quality of sun creams in the United States compared to elsewhere. I was in South Korea earlier this year, and it is so clear how far advanced the rest of the world is on sunscreen, and we deserve better in the US. Ocasio-Cortez said that Food and Drug Administration's regulations on sunscreen, which haven't been updated since 1999, are needlessly blocking Americans' access to higher performance UV filters that can be found in other countries. It's not too corny. Please contact your members of Congress, Ocasio-Cortez instructed her viewers, ask them to break through some of the regulatory barriers on the FDA. And as the article states, the idea isn't particularly controversial among skincare experts. For years, dermatologists have pointed out that the advanced ingredients in non-US sun creams would provide better cancer protection than the ingredients that are allowed in the United States. But what ended up happening is that some people on the left, look, these guys aren't part of the left. They're not part of the left. It's I don't care if these guys are literally further to the left than anybody could ever be. They're not. As a member of the left, I denounce people who criticized her for this. So basically, she made this video, and people on the left, I keep saying people on the left, but they're not. Again, they're not. People who are brain-dead stupid idiots went around saying that I don't even understand the criticism. They're this is, you hear me struggling. I can't even put it into words because of how stupid this is. So some people, from the anti-AOC podcasters to apparently some chapters of DSA, the Rhode Island chapter, they stated, just things that are just again, criticizing, quote-unquote, her for this, saying, like, the Rhode Island DSA said, a true tribune of the working class, after, like, by retweeting this video. And they retweeted a meme of, like, some bullshit podcasters called Do Dissidents who said, like, anybody who wasn't triggered was not a leftist. It's like, like, and everybody pointed this out, but I'll say it again regardless. Protecting people from skin cancer is good. Good thing. Not a bad thing. Protecting people from the cancer that is not only already the easiest type of cancer to get, literally all you have to do to get skin cancer is just go outside and stand out there for a little too long, which is very common for a lot of workers being sent out in the harsh conditions in the summertime. Summers that are getting very, very worse with the rising of something called climate change. Like, here's a very interesting thing that I know a lot of you probably don't use. A lot of you probably don't use this, but I want you to go ahead. Here's an interesting thing that you probably want to know. Type in this into your, like, search bar, uv.willyweather.com. It's a site that measures the UV radiation that is currently going on outside. Some of it is basic and you all already know. Near noon, it's the highest, and at night, it doesn't exist. But it's not always like that. Like, that's the standard one, but every day it shifts. Sometimes it's really high in the early part of the day, and then when it starts to rain, the UV radiation gets cut in half. It's a good way to measure the UV radiation that goes on, but one of the things that is noticeable, especially nowadays, is that now the height is way higher than it usually was, and it stays in the red, which is the worst, meaning the, like, don't go outside for too long. It stays in that level longer than it normally does now. And again, skin cancer is literally the easiest type of cancer to get. Like, if you, literally, this is a public service announcement. You need to monitor yourself for melanoma, because it's very easy to get, especially if you are of paler skin. Pay attention to the ABCDEs of melanoma. Asymmetry, if your mole is asymmetrical. Border, if the border around your mole isn't like consistent. If it's not like one color. If it's larger than 1/4 of an inch. Or if it changes and develops. Like, be mindful of those things, because those things can be dangerous. Now, it's not necessarily to say that you can't have moles of those varieties that aren't melanoma. Well, I think evolving is probably like an indicator of melanoma. But basically, keep checking. Like, always check yourself for anything. Be mindful of all of the dangers and whatevers that you could have. But anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. A topic that I guarantee is going to be really interesting. I know basically every topic I do is interesting, but I think this one might be more interesting than normal. This is a topic that I've quietly been mulling over for a while now. In fact, there was technically another topic that might have been related to this one that I might have flipped over in order to talk about this. That one being about transhumanism, but this one is about a particular tenet in regards to the transhumanist ideology. And it is revolving around the ethics of artificial intelligence. A topic that is relatively hot at the moment. But, you know, it's just one that probably does worth mentioning. Because I don't think a lot of people on the, political scene are kind of talking about it outside of, I guess, the transhumanists. Or maybe libertarian tech bros. I've avoided this topic for a long time because I didn't necessarily know what I thought. But after some developments have been going on, I've started to look into this topic. I started to actually formulate opinions on this. But before we get into that, let's just kind of explain and give some general ideas like what's going on. What is this? The idea of artificial intelligence has long fascinated humanity from early on. Myths and legends and stories of creatures being given sentience by humans have existed since ancient times. Probably because a lot of humans believe themselves to be artificial intelligence. We are given our intelligence by a higher being, whether it be a god or gods. So the idea of humans creating an artificial being of their own is tantalizing to many, thinking we can conquer the thing that separates gods from humans. This kind of thinking only continued with the Industrial Revolution, and the introduction of the idea of evolution, with Samuel Butler writing an article entitled Darwin Among the Machines, where he proposed that machines would soon supplant man as the dominant species on Earth, and that humanity would be the cause of their own downfall, saying, quote, "We refer to the question, what sort of creature man's next successor in the supremacy of the Earth is likely to be. We have often heard this debated, but it appears to us that we ourselves are creating our own successors. We are daily adding to the beauty and delicacy of their physical organization. We are daily giving them greater power and supplying by all sorts of ingenious contrivances that self-regulating, self-acting power which will be to them what intellect has been to the human race. In the course of ages, we shall find ourselves the inferior race. Day by day, however, the machines are gaining ground upon us. Day by day, we are becoming more subservient to them. More men are daily bound as slaves to tend to them. More men are daily devoting the energies of their whole lives to the development of mechanical life. The upshot is simply a question of time, but that the time will come when the machines will hold the real supremacy over the world and its inhabitants is what no person of a truly philosophical mind can for a moment question." This guy was so passionate about that idea, he even wrote a book explaining this scenario, Erewhon. Now, the guy was a little bit of a Luddite, going so far as to say war to the death should be instantly proclaimed against them. Every machine of every sort should be destroyed by the well-wisher of his species. Let there be no exceptions made, no quarter shown. Let us at once go back to the primeval condition of race. But the concerns were there, and it mostly got talked about in a fictional context, because those are areas where you're allowed to be a little bit more creative with your things. If you want to tell a political story, it's better to wrap it up in a fictional setting rather than telling a real one. We do it all the time. We want to tell a story about racism? No, it has to be about, furries. And people who had concerns about artificial intelligence would usually write or produce some sort of story regarding it, rather than simply just explaining what their concerns were. And you've all probably seen at least one or two or a lot of the many stories that have this sort of idea in place. Metropolis, iRobot, Star Trek, WALL-E, 2001: A Space Odyssey. But we all know the biggest and most well-known one that delves into this topic. But there was always one issue with telling your, problems with society via a fictional story. A lot of times people get drawn into the idea of it being a fictional story, so any actual legitimate, reasonable concerns that you have are kind of brushed off as sort of fictional stories. Again, these are fictional stories, especially considering a lot of them were science fiction stories, so they were usually told, oh, this will happen, far off in the future. More likely because a lot of people really did think this would happen far in the future, that this wouldn't really be an issue for people who were, this wouldn't be an issue when these people were alive. But with the technological boom of the 2000s, all of a sudden these concerns got a little too prevalent. We've seen AI go from something basic like Clippy to something more advanced like Cortana. AI is also a lot more common than you realize. No matter what, your phone has a virtual assistant that is built in to hear you and perform tasks for you. Alexa, OK Google, Siri, etc. While those still lack a capacity to become truly sentient and are only limited to basic tasks, ever so slightly the tasks get more advanced. Take smart homes. People are now connecting Google to do minimal stuff that we know that a virtual assistant usually does, to controlling things like their thermostat and lights, and concerns grew a lot more. With the rise of artificial intelligence in the manufacturing industry, Andrew Yang opened a lot of people's eyes in regarding to it, saying that they could potentially take jobs in the future. But most people were having some sort of sigh of relief. oh, okay, it might happen in a factory, but that won't happen for, say, a contractor job. Well, now they're doing it for contracting. Okay, but they can't do it for like a cashier. Oops, they're doing it for cashiers. Okay, but they can't really do it for like waitressing. Oh, they're doing it for waitresses too. And again, they've gotten more advanced. Originally, like most people remember when self-service aisles in the stores were first introduced, and many people didn't like them. It was very common for people to say that the self-service aisles were terrible. But now, usually in a store, self-service aisles are the only thing that are open. Like, I've been to a ton of stores where they just, like, they have the cash registers for, like, normal people, but there's just no one there. Like, they don't hire the employees to do that part anymore, when most people will just go to the self-service aisles. And originally it was like, oh, you just had 2 self-service things at the end. Now they take up 2 sections of the, like, store. But there was always 2 things that kept them from going too far. One, people were like, okay, well, at the very least, they're not sentient. Again, these are just robots. These are not, they're doing, like, basic tasks, but they are not, like, fully sentient yet. And even all the robots that are built to be fully sentient aren't really there yet. But the last major thing that many people were like, okay, at least there's one thing that we can verifiably show that they won't cross that threshold. And that is the idea of them doing jobs that are not something that are menial. Something like making art, or making music, or making writing. Something that has to be made by a human. If they can't do that, then we're perfectly safe. And then they started doing that. And the concerns of artificial intelligence have grown more than they ever have before. To the point where writers in Hollywood are going on strike right now to avoid losing their jobs to artificial intelligence. And we've seen a lot of people talk about a lot of various different things that are very readily available to be made with artificial intelligence. And with that, we're going to go over some of the things that are like being used with artificial intelligence. I'll give my thoughts and explanations and my broader sense about them. Okay, to start off with, we'll go with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, or Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, is an AI chatbot. Nothing really new. We've had a lot of AI chatbots in the past, Cleverbot, etc. But this one is way more advanced than they are. Rather than giving you a small text response, instead, you can give it a simple prompt, and it can write a very hefty thing. Type, write an essay about World War II. Boom. Type, write an iambic parameter about Joe Biden. Boom. Type, give me 107 facts about butterscotch. Boom. You have another abysmal Channel Federator video. Quick explanation about what that is. Channel Federator is an online company made by the animation studio Federator to become a very prominent online via a multi-channel network of many YouTubers, as well as making original content. One of which is called 107 Facts, which is basically them saying a bunch of stupid BS about literally any TV show, well, I guess basically any TV show, and they just make quote-unquote 107 facts about the property. For example, here's the kind of stuff that they would make. Let me just give a brief example. Let me just give like a brief thing to try and pretend to be like a Channel Federator thing. Hold on. Hey guys, it's me, Blank, from Channel Federator, and here's the 107 facts about SpongeBob SquarePants. Number 1, SpongeBob was made by Steven Hillenburg. Number 2, SpongeBob was originally called SpongeBoy SquarePants. Number 3, his last name comes from the facts that he has square pants. Number 4, SpongeBob was made on Nickelodeon. Number 5, his best friend is Patrick. Number 6, he has a neighbor named Squidward. Number 7, and you go on and so forth. So originally they just did it for shows in general, but now they're going to the point where they're doing it for individual characters of certain shows. So this one, they made an episode about the South Park character named Butters, and many of the facts in it were basic stuff, as usual, like low common denominator stuff. But what was interesting is that there were a ton of facts that they said that were just blatantly untrue. For example, like it would say like something like, in this episode, Butters did this, But in actuality, a completely different character did that. It was so controversial that they actually ended up deleting it and posting a brand new video about the topic. And people were like, why was this video so blatantly wrong? Well, as it turns out, one other YouTuber decided to take that exact same prompt, write 107 facts about butters in ChatGPT, clicked enter, and they got the facts from the video. You can understand why a lot of people are kind of concerned about this. Again, writing was sort of seen as something that only a person could do, but now a chatbot can do one that is decent. And there's also another one where it's like, what if the work has to be something that is completely non-centric? Like here's the fact. A lot of people know this, but a lot of YouTube channels, they have a team of writers, and then they hire someone else to do the script. What if at that point they could just literally just ask a chatbot to make a video, make a list for a thing, and then just give it off to someone to read? Cut out the writers that you need to hire to do that. Another worrisome thing is in the field of education. Why write an essay when I could have GPT write it for me? There's also concerns in the entertainment field. Why pay these union writers when I can get ChatGPT to do it for me? The latter is being especially troubling since a lot of Hollywood is literally just circle jerking about old intellectual property. That is literally just so easy to do. Write a story about Spider-Man and then just go off of that. There is another thing that is lingering about the artificial intelligence in Hollywood, but we'll put a pin in that for later. But first, what can we do about ChatGPT for these fields? Well, I'm not in education, so I don't really know any safeguards that we can do for ChatGPT. The only safeguard I think is somewhat okay is that a lot of high schoolers are cheap, so maybe they don't want to fork over the money that you have to pay to do ChatGPT right. If you're a teacher, be wary. Unfortunately, this is a thing that's going to happen. Like kids writing the answers on their hand, plagiarizing Wikipedia, stealing the answer keys, etc. It's just going to happen. Just be mindful. If you're a teacher, maybe get ChatGPT so then you can see the kind of writings that it gives you. And the latter thing in regards to Hollywood is simple. Support the writer's strike going on right now. Okay, so the next thing regarding artificial intelligence is AI art. This is the one thing that I remember hearing a long time ago on the podcast called Sleepycast. Psychic Pebbles, the creator of the hit Adult Swim show Smiling Friends, stated that he had a fear that AI could be used to make great cartoons via writing and maybe through the art itself. And sure enough, during 2023, a lot of programs that were released had you doing just that. You could put in a prompt, and then it would give you an art piece in mostly every style of drawing. Though to be fair, most of the things are stylized fantasy, really. I don't really know why. For some reason, stylized fantasy is the one style that all AI art seems to be mimicking now. The only other one is the one that really looks basically anything that looks kind of realistic but not really, which stylized fantasy is known for. While unique styles and some other prominent styles are still yet to be made, you can broadly make anything in the art style. It's not the best, though, at the moment. A lot of AI art has a lot of glaring problems, hands being the most prominent error. I guess they are like humans. Thankfully, right now, as of yet, they haven't gotten to the point where they can produce actual animation. Only touch up existing stuff, tracing IRL people to make an animation. That probably does mean rotoscope is probably dead, or at the very least, rotoscope in the traditional sense of one thing that just seems weird is just things seemed more personal when the artists themselves had to trace over every single frame of a thing. But now you can get an animation to do literally just that. Now the thing is, it's not necessarily bad, as long as you make it very abundantly clear you are using AI art. But a lot of people are now using AI art and crediting it as their own, oh, I wrote this, I drew this, but it is very obviously AI art. And it's getting worse because a lot of AI art actually takes art that currently exists in that style and then puts it in the algorithm to then use, which technically means it plagiarizes art. So it's literally plagiarism with extra steps. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, we have also gotten a lot of people who use AI art to spread misinformation. That funny haha Pope in coat image, Trump's arrest photos, an AI image of a terrorist attack on the Pentagon. Like every tool, it's a tool that some people use for very nefarious purposes, which we'll get into again when we go into another form of artificial intelligence thing. What are the solutions? Well, first of all, on your end, be more mindful of stuff you see online, because originally it seemed like you had to look for Photoshops. Now you have to look for AI art as well as Photoshops. And there also needs to be some sort of regulation in regards to artificial intelligence like pictures. Next on the itinerary, AI voices. TTS is nothing new. We've seen a ton of TTS voices that we've played around with for fun.
Microsoft Sam.
And
Will from afar.
Being the most prominent examples I can think of. And many people have actually went so far as to make TTS voices to sound like other people. And like a year or two ago, there was a website that started making artificial intelligence voices of all certain cartoon characters, the most prominent one being SpongeBob SquarePants. And now we have AI voices of a shit ton of cartoon characters, movie characters, celebrities, and even politicians. And it's gotten more advanced than simply putting the text in and getting a semi-competent sounding voice. Now, people can take tons of audio from a person, feed it into an artificial intelligence, and create a pretty realistic voice saying something, which has led to 2 online video subsections that you might be familiar with. Taking a character and having them sing a very famous song, and having Joe Biden, Obama, and Donald Trump play video games with each other. The newer ways especially are causing a heck of a lot of issues. Similar questions being asked in regards to, we see this question a lot. I've asked this question a little bit during this show, but let me explain again. Why hire human voice actors when you can have a robot do it instead? Many voice actors are already saying that they do not consent to AI reproductions of their voices. The most prominent ones that I can think of are Grey Delisle and the guy who played Iroh in the 3rd season of Avatar, Greg Baldwin. And they're very much loudly urging any future voice actors to make it very abundantly clear that they do not consent to their AI reproductions of their voices either. This has even gotten into a lot of more controversy nowadays because there's been a recent Scooby-Doo animation called Scooby-Doo Springtrapped where apparently, I didn't see this, I saw this recommended to me a couple of times, but I didn't actually watch it. But then I saw the ensuing controversy, and I probably checked the short out at one point. But basically, it's a short video where they have artificial voices of a lot of the Scooby-Doo characters, and some of the voice actors who were the voices of those characters, particularly Grey Delisle, publicly shitting on this video because of its use of AI voices, especially as those voice actors are currently on strike to make sure that their voices do not get replaced with AI. Now, here's the thing that I know a lot of you are thinking right now. I get that a lot of you have probably done AI voices. You've probably used AI voices, and you've made it. I'm pretty sure that you guys don't want to replace your favorite voice actors or whatever, but be wary of the potential of the tool. The tool is the dangerous thing, and the people who can use that tool. Sometimes it seems like harmless fun, but other times it could be somewhat dangerous. And I'm not even innocent either. I've used AI voices in the past, and I probably will continue to do so. I saw no issue with it, especially with the way I was using it. I'm not doing the whole, feeding it into an AI and then having it recite, Shakespeare to me. I'm literally doing it old school style, text-to-speech. And then just typing it in, and then getting a semi-competent response. But one thing happened a little, not that long ago, that did make me reevaluate, potentially using AI voices in the future, where Ron DeSantis released an ad that had Trump quotes that he used an AI voice to have it recreate so that Trump would literally say it. While it's old school style, it's noticeable that it's an AI voice. The internet has shown that a lot of people can fall for it, especially on the right. What to do about this one? Well, there's really only 2 options you can. 1, ban the use of artificial intelligence in political ads, which is probably a no-brainer, and 2, to reiterate a point yet again, support the writer's strike. The next AI-related thing is probably one of the earliest forms of artificial intelligence, anything that you have seen outside of fictionalized versions for the media. Deepfakes. Really, deepfakes are the worst fears of AI technology. You simply record a person talking, then you take the images and voices from a different person, and you could somehow merge the two together to create a super realistic image of someone talking, basically indistinguishable from the real thing. Everything else has had some form of safeguard that somehow makes it so that it's okay. Like an AI voice, you don't see the person doing the voice, so it's oh, you can't verify if they actually said that. AI art, it's art. It's a still image, so you can't pretend that it's a real thing that might happen. Especially if you're trying to do a real thing, because it could look somewhat fake. But deepfakes are literally the scariest one, because you literally cannot tell the difference between deepfakes and real things. And there's been a lot of moral quandaries surrounding it. One big one is in regards to the media industry. Deepfakes being used to de-age and or flat out revive dead actors. It was somewhat, it was controversial when it first started happening, but as the technology has improved, it's become even more of a, moral quandary. One recent example coming from the Star Wars show Book of Boba Fett, looking a lot more realistic than what they did at the end of Mandalorian Season 2. And while the tool has received a lot of praise, it has very much more received a lot of criticism, particularly when they do this with an actor who is dead, especially considering film studios are literally making it part of actors' contracts now to do full 360 face scans in order to prepare for the death and or anything else regarding an actor. Again, why hire an actor to play a character when you could do a deepfake of them and do the product instead? One that you can literally control like a marionette, and you can use those models for literally anything else. And this isn't just main cast either. WandaVision background actress Alexandria Rubicala revealed that background actors are getting this same treatment too. Background actors are getting this treatment. Literally the people that you pay to go in the background and just stand in a crowd, those people are getting affected by this. There's also a different type of acting that has a propensity of using deepfakes. Porn. It's incredibly common for people to use deepfake tech to make the face of a prominent person in some sort of pornography. For real, literally all you have to do is look up any celebrity name with the word sex or porn or anything relating to those terms, and you'll find a ton of deepfakes regarding the subject. And things get even worse because in some cases, some people will do this with actors who should not be in porn, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. But making porn is not the only form of disinformation that we have in regards to deepfakes, as we are seeing that it is being used to spread massive amounts of disinformation in regards to very important things. For example, April 2020, the Belgian branch of Extinction Rebellion posted a video where they made the Prime Minister of Belgium say that deforestation is what caused COVID-19. Many deepfake videos were made of Joe Biden, making it look like his cognitive decline was way worse than it actually was. In May, a viral video of Kamala Harris in a seemingly drunken rant saying tomorrow will be today tomorrow was a very prominent deepfake. And in June, Ron DeSantis made a deepfake ad that involved Donald Trump hugging Anthony Fauci. Now, what the heck can we do about deepfakes? Honestly, there is really no option that I can see outside of just flat out banning deepfakes. I'll take severely punishing deepfake users, but honestly, I think it should just be, the technology should be banned. I think, honestly, the world should probably band together to not have that technology allowed. I mean, the last session of Congress, we had a bill called the Deepfakes Accountability Act, and it's a somewhat good bill. It's holding deepfakes accountable, and if that's all you can do, then by all means, do that. But again, I would rather it just be completely banned. And finally, the last thing in regards to artificial intelligence. The final question of AI. The question of, what if they do become sentient? What if some scientist creates an AI that is a sentient being? It can feel, it can cry, it can do all of the things. Now, I should preface it with this. Do I think we have to worry about that? Not for a while. From what I've seen in regards to all the attempts in this field, we're just not there yet. Now, for starters, I think that if anything is made, we need to have the safeguards. Like, we need to make sure that there are safeguards in case, like, things go awry. Like, we need to have those safeguards in place to make sure nothing bad can happen. Secondly, I would just say maybe we can hold off researching in this field. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but I just have to say, there are a ton of things that we probably should be investing more money into, and this probably isn't it. We should probably be focusing more on fixing the climate change issue, you know, curing cancer, all that kind of stuff. But let's just say fully, like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, it happens, there's AI, and they're there. What next? I believe that they should be given full civil rights. And before anybody comments or says something, I am not saying this as a just in case. I know a lot of people like to make that joke, like with AI like stuff, when they're like, I'm gonna say like, I support our robot overlords, wink wink. Like, I get the whole joke behind it, but it's like, in all seriousness, if artificial intelligence, if we have an artificial intelligence that is a sentient being that can feel pain, love, remorse, happiness, and all the other human emotions, like if they can think, if they can feel, like if they can comprehend their own existence and understand things, I honestly don't understand why they shouldn't deserve the same basic human rights as we do. Do I think that is a thing that we will be seeing in the near future? No. Do I think this is something that we'll be seeing in our lifetime? Probably not. Maybe if we get up there in age, but honestly, I don't think so. Like, maybe if we reach up there in age, we'll catch the first glimpses of like real artificial intelligence in that field. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we do have, like, I don't think that AI really is coming that close. So to recap, AI is a tool that can be used for good and evil. We need to be weary of the malicious ways you can use the tool. But anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.